Good morning, or well, good afternoon. So I kind of just wanted to get on audio, and this is something new that I'm doing, but I figured I might want to start just talking out some of my thoughts, just randomly. It could be for whatever reason, but so today I ended up coming across a an audio book on YouTube, and it's by Shahrazad Ali. If anyone knows who she is, Shahrazad Ali, she's pretty much like I guess you would say like a pro-black woman activist. She's kind of controversial, in her beliefs, and I think it's really based off of the way she talked. She kind of says like the unpopular opinion, which I respect. I respect her truth for sure. There are some things that I agree with and some things that I don't. But basically there's a book that she has called The Blackman's Guide to Understanding the Black Woman. So I've been listening to that today, and so far it's been pretty good. I would say that it did give me some things to think about. I know in chapter 1, she talked about the early stages of the Black woman's experience. And so I thought it was pretty interesting on how her mother is pretty much her first teacher. And they pretty much look to the mother, as the general teacher on how to be the proper, quote unquote, proper Black woman. And she just highlights, just some of the common practices that Black mothers do when it pertains to how to deal with their father. So not necessarily like, men in general, but basically like the teaching the child practices on how the mother deals with the father, and what the mother, tells to the child regarding her father. And it can be as simple as if they get into a disagreement, she uses some sort of charm, to kind of shield the child, from it escalating. Or even like when certain things happen, like I don't know, they're on birth control or something like that. Or even like if they're like they'll say, don't tell your father this or that, they'll keep certain things, especially like women related things between the women, and they'll be like, don't tell your dad. And so she talked about how like just certain things like that, just certain ways that's been done, how it'll register to the Black child on like some of the negative reactions or practices that we have on our Black counterparts, within our demographic. So some of it is, men can't be trusted. Men won't understand. This is how you handle men, some sort of like manipulative type of thing. And so I thought it was pretty interesting. I can see how she's controversial just from like her language. She is, and honestly, I don't even think it's offensive, to be honest, because I'm looking at it on a high level view. I'm really looking at the core, like the why behind the message, but it's just the way that the words are written. And I think she referred to Black women as like fire breathing dragons and wild behavior and stuff like that. And I think like I don't see it as name calling. I can see like how a general person will read it and they'll be like, this is offensive. She's the term in the Black community is she's a mammy or pick me. And it's like, that's not really the case. I don't think that she's like name calling or, not per se. I think that partly because she is spiritual. Spiritual people, they tend to be very illustrative, with their language and, the way they put words together. So even though she's saying that, like, it's not like a diss, it's not a dig. It's a analogy, really. So, like, yeah, it's really just an analogy. It's no different than watching like an animated film, when it talks about somebody being angry and, the face will turn red and fumes start coming out their ears. It's very just animated and illustrative in the way that she talks. Low-key, I do think that she knows what she's doing when she's doing that. Like, she knows how to push people's buttons. I feel like she knows how to push people's buttons, but because it's her truth, I don't think she really like cares. Well, I don't think that like she sees that as the big issue, so she's willing to take the negative feedback from certain people because she knows overall like the truth is going to make more of an impact than the negativity. But that's my whole point, my whole opinion or perspective on things. I could be wrong, but I just see it that way. But anyway, so they get into chapter 2 where she talks about the teenage years and how this is where black girls will start putting like some of the tactics that was taught by their mother into play. They'll start putting that into the field when it comes to when it comes to interacting with their male counterparts. And so, and I think, again, that was a good perspective to look at. There were a couple things that I didn't necessarily agree with. And one in particular kind of stood out to me was where she was talking about how sexuality kind of gets introduced to the black girl. And she basically, brings up Soul Train. And so Soul Train is pretty much like a show that's been around for decades. I don't know if it's still running, but I remember Soul Train growing up in the 90s. But she talks about how that's usually like the first stages where she's introduced to, I guess, black people. And in my opinion, I think it's maybe like being desirable in the black community. And so she talks about like how there's like wild behavior, the women are, dressed, provocatively, moving provocatively, and like the lewd expressions and things like that. And how it's considered like quote unquote wild behavior. Now, my perspective, the reason why I disagree on that is because I feel like that's a matter of opinion, honestly. I don't think that the way people conduct themselves on the show, like Soul Train, is like considered negative. I think that if black girls were introduced more on the history of African culture in general, it wouldn't be taken as sexual. Now, I do kind of agree that maybe because she's brought up in black culture, from a woman's perspective, like the way in like some of the ways that her mom taught her practices, how that contributes to it being like negative sexuality or how it can be interpreted that way. Like, I think that's kind of the pathway that leads to that. So that could be a factor. But I think that if African culture and customs were introduced early to the child, by the time she is around the stage where she is introduced into, Soul Train or that type of culture or environment, it wouldn't be seen as like a sexual negative context, because honestly, like the way people conduct themselves with the dancing and the gyrating and the, less clothing, that's not just a Black American thing. There's several African societies that do that, and they've been doing that since the beginning of time. It's very tribal in the way that, we party against and be around each other. And generally, the people that's on Soul Train, they are of the younger demographic. And generally, when you're younger, you tend to have more primal behavior. You're kind of moving based on your raw natural instincts and feelings. It's not really just it's not so much about what should be done. It's more about like how you feel at the moment, and you're kind of just taking the moment and what it is. And I think that's something that the child should understand at first, like looking inward and seeing like the root of why people do that. And I mean from a cultural standpoint, not from an individual standpoint. Culturally, that's the essence of why our people kind of come together, and we kind of, engage in that manner. Now, granted, not all African societies do that. African is diverse as African Americans. Africans is pretty much the origin of human civilization. So like there's so many different nuances and different cultures and customs within Africa, but and in each, just like every other African based society has something, basically like so like there's several African societies that do kind of gyrate and wear less clothing and stuff like that. I mean, the Caribbean is one of them, so it just happens to be that in America, that's another African society that does that. And I don't think that that's bad. Like even in the Caribbean, when people, they dress that way and they gyrate, like, someone who's foreign can look at it and be like, oh my God, this is sexual and this is just negative and blah, 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 blah. But for the people who do this every single year from the time that they were a child, and that's their culture, they don't see it as something provocative and sexual. It's really, a means of celebration and just like, enjoying each other and being in that moment, And so I think it's a little closed-minded and ignorant, to kind of say that something like Soul Train is kind of seen as, it's negative and is negative sexuality. Yeah. So I don't know if that's what she meant to. Maybe she means like, just generally how she's brought up in, Black American mother to childhood, and how that kind of journeys into her teenage year when she gets introduced to sexuality and connection with males. Maybe she's explaining like that's the pathway of how it leads and this is the result. And I can see that. I can see that. But I just think like in general, when it comes to like African culture, I feel like if customs and practice, when the positivity behind African customs and practices are ingrained at an early stage, and she understands the root and the essence of why it's being done, by the time she reached her teenage years, I think she'll handle it a lot more responsibly, because now she has the knowledge, the proper knowledge behind it. So, but yeah, so far I thought the book was pretty interesting. And yeah, like I might do some more, audio notes or videos or what have you, just kind of, explaining my perspective on things. So until next time.